There was a time when Western civilization, for all its flaws, stood on one guiding principle: that reason, open debate, and the free exchange of ideas were not just academic niceties, but the very foundation of progress. This was the Enlightenment spirit, an audacious belief that humanity, armed with logic and evidence, could better itself. But if you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed something troubling. That spirit is in retreat. The institutions built to defend it now seem embarrassed by it. Open debate is increasingly replaced with moral pronouncements. Evidence takes a back seat to ideology, and those who dare to dissent from the prevailing orthodoxy are not engaged in argument and debate, but are excommunicated from polite society. In short, we are witnessing the death of the Enlightenment spirit, and not through violent revolution, but through neglect, cynicism, and cultural amnesia. The Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries was not a single event, but a cultural movement stretching from coffee houses in London to the salons of Paris. Its champions, thinkers like Voltaire, Locke, Kant, Hume, they all believed that human affairs could be governed by reason rather than superstition, open discussion rather than dogma, and evidence rather than authority. It was never perfect. The very same societies preaching liberty still practice slavery, for instance. The same advocates for tolerance often fail to extend it universally. But the spirit was aspirational, a commitment to improving the human condition through the careful application of reason and empathy. The Enlightenment spirit didn't just give us science and political liberalism, it reshaped the entire moral landscape of the West, from the abolition of slavery to the expansion of education, and from women's suffrage to the very notion of universal human rights. The cracks began to appear in the 20th century. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the horrors of fascism and communism shook the West's faith in reason as a safeguard against barbarism. In academia, postmodern thinkers began questioning the Enlightenment's foundational ideas: truth, objectivity, and universal values, arguing that all knowledge is shaped by power structures. And whilst there's merit in recognizing the biases in our systems, the postmodern turn often slid into relativism, the idea that there is no truth, only perspectives. Meanwhile, in politics and culture, the Enlightenment's slow, patient process of debate and reform struggled to compete with the adrenaline rush of revolution and the emotional appeal of outrage. The media, first newspapers, then television, and now social platforms, learned that outrage sells and nuance doesn't. Today, we see the consequences. Many institutions that once prized critical inquiry now enforce ideological conformity. University campuses, once bastions of open debate, increasingly act as gatekeepers of acceptable opinion. Political discourse, both left and right, has become less about persuasion and much more about declaring moral superiority over one's opponents. The Enlightenment's marketplace of ideas has been replaced with a kind of moral marketplace, where ideas aren't tested for truth, but for whether they align with the moral fashions of the moment. The problem isn't that morality is bad, it's that morality untethered from reason quickly becomes tyranny by consensus. And the death of the Enlightenment spirit is not merely an academic concern. Without a culture of open inquiry, society becomes brittle. Scientific progress stalls when inconvenient findings are suppressed. Policy becomes driven by narrative rather than by evidence, and public trust erodes when citizens suspect they are being managed rather than informed. And history offers grim reminders. The Catholic Church's suppression of heliocentrism, the Soviet Union's embrace of laicism, and McCarthy-era censorship. All were cases where ideology overpowered evidence with disastrous results. And we flatter ourselves by thinking we've outgrown such tendencies. In reality, we've just found a new justification for them. The Enlightenment spirit doesn't die in a single moment. It has been eroded piece by piece over decades, and I think there are three forces in particular that stand out. First, the politicalization of everything. An ideal Enlightenment culture, political affiliation, is just one aspect of a person's worldview, and should be open to discussion and disagreement. But today, we find politics has metastasized into a total identity. You're not a person who happens to vote a certain way. You are your politics, and your ideas are all prejudged accordingly. This makes genuine debate almost impossible, because people aren't defending ideas anymore. It's almost as though they're defending their very sense of self. Second, the monetization of outrage. Modern media, from legacy outlets to social platforms, thrive on engagement, and nothing engages like anger. Algorithms amplify divisive and moralizing content because it keeps people clicking and watching. And in such an environment, slow, evidence-based argument is a liability. It perhaps doesn't generate the adrenaline hit that outrage does. And third and finally, the weaponization of moral authority. Moral outrage has always been a human instinct, but the Enlightenment spirit sought to temper that outrage with due process and evidence. Now, in the age of viral scandals and instant social condemnation, due process is often considered unnecessary. The court of public opinion has become a standing tribunal with no rules of evidence, no right to defence, and no statute of limitations. There are still pockets where the Enlightenment spirit survives. Some independent journalists, small publishers, and open access scientific communities continue to operate on the principles of free inquiry and debate, but they are fighting an uphill battle against larger cultural forces. In the scientific community, for example, we see increasing concern about research that produces problematic findings. Certain topics, whether in sociology, genetics, or economics, are considered too politically dangerous to investigate openly. This chilling effect doesn't just hurt science, it undermines public trust in science itself. In the realm of free speech, we've moved from the Enlightenment idea that bad ideas are best defeated by better ones, to the belief that bad ideas must be silenced entirely. The problem is, once you normalize the silencing of ideas, the definition of bad becomes elastic, stretching to include whatever dominant culture dislikes at that moment. And in politics, the Enlightenment ideal of negotiation and compromise is giving way to zero-sum tribalism. Each side treats the other not as misguided fellow citizens, but as enemies to be destroyed. The result is paralysis, mistrust, and the slow decay of democratic norms. Some might say the Enlightenment is outdated, a relic of 18th century Europe that has, well, little to do with our modern diverse societies. But this misses the point entirely. The Enlightenment spirit is not about a specific culture that birthed it. It's about the method, the idea, a shared commitment to evidence, reason, and dialogue as the best way to resolve disputes and ultimately improve society. Without that method, what's left? Rule by ideology? By the loudest voices? By whoever controls the narrative? History has shown us where that leads. Stagnation at best, and tyranny at worst. Now, we don't have to idealize the Enlightenment or its thinkers to recognize its value. They were flawed humans like the rest of us. But their central insight, that truth can only emerge through open, critical exchange, remains as vital today as it was in the 1700s. The Enlightenment spirit won't be revived by accident. It requires deliberate effort. The courage to engage with people you disagree with, the patience to examine evidence before judging, and the humility to admit when you're wrong. It also requires resisting the cultural incentives that reward moral posturing over reasoned argument. And that may mean refusing to participate in the ritualized shaming of those who express unpopular views. It means demanding that our institutions, from universities to newsrooms, uphold their commitment to open debate. And it means defending the idea that the pursuit of truth is more important than protecting our feelings. If we lose the Enlightenment spirit entirely, we will drift into an era where ideas are judged not on their merit, but whether they please those in power. And we've been there before, and we know how that story ends. The Enlightenment was never a finished project. It was always a work in progress. The question is whether we still have the will to continue that work, or whether we'll let it fade into a historical footnote. The choice, as always, is ours.